Hello, I'm Jacob Branstiter, a senior history major at Bowling Green State University, and this is my senior project. I decided to base my project on a story that's a little unconventional for a history project. That's because this is the story of a fraud. This is the Vinland Map. For over half a century, it was the subject of an enormous controversy regarding its authenticity as a historical document. On first look, the map is a crudely drawn world map with a few labels scattered throughout. It was found in a manuscript from mainland Europe dating to the 15th century, but it has a few oddities for a world map from that time. Specifically, the far eastern and western portions of the map are the most interesting. On the eastern edge of the map, we can see that the far east coast has noticeable features resembling the Korean peninsula and the islands resembling Japan and maybe Taiwan. Considering Europeans weren't known to have knowledge of these places in the 15th century, this certainly is an oddity. Next, our attention is drawn to the far western portion of the map. Here we see common depictions of Iceland, the Azores Islands, and the Canary Islands. The depictions of these places are normal for the 15th century. However, there are two other land masses in the northwest Atlantic that would become the most controversial features of the map. Firstly, we see a depiction of Greenland. The reason why this drawing of Greenland is so unusual for the 15th century is that Europeans at this time had not mapped out much of the island's coastline due to the thick ice covering much of the island. And what coastline is mapped out tends to be extremely varied in this time period. In fact, the ice-locked situation of Greenland caused Europeans to believe that Greenland was actually a peninsula jutting out from a great Arctic continent trapped under the ice. It wasn't until centuries later that Greenland was confirmed to be an island. The other landmass neighboring Greenland on this map, labeled Vinlandia Insula, is a representation of the island of Vinland. Vinland, of course, is the colony established by Vikings in modern-day Newfoundland by the famous Viking Leif Erikson around 900 AD. Although the colony had been abandoned for centuries by the 15th century. In this drawing, there are waterways that may represent the St. Lawrence River and perhaps the Hudson Strait. The tale of the Vinland colony has only been known to exist in Scandinavian sources, mainly their sagas. So a physical depiction of Vinland on a non-Scandinavian map has enormous implications for the story of European world exploration. If this map proved to be real, then it would prove that other Europeans, not just the Vikings and their descendants, knew that there was a North Atlantic landmass beyond Greenland and the Atlantic, at least some years before Christopher Columbus set sail. Furthermore, the map proposes that Europeans knew that Greenland was an island, and that they had knowledge of some of the geographic features of the Far East. Obviously, this would be an enormously huge discovery, rewriting history books and changing the way we understand the European views of the world as they entered the age of exploration in the 1400s. Arguably, it began to do just that before it was finally found out to be a fraud. So now we are faced with the irony of having an artifact that, although fake, is still of historical importance. Why? Because the story of the Vinland Map teaches us much about the work of the historian, the challenges they face when working with dubious primary sources, and why it's important to observe scholarly practices of collaboration and caution. This presentation recounts the efforts of various researchers trying to cut through the mystery of the Vinland Map and the mistakes that were made along the way. Telling the story of this debate involves a lot of condensing of both time and sources. Therefore, to effectively tell the story, we will be chopping up the timeline into several portions, which will then be explained in depth. This first section takes us back to 1957 and the man Lawrence Whitten. Whitten was known as a collector of old manuscripts. During a visit to Geneva, Switzerland, he befriended the man Enzo Ferrajoli de Rye, who sold him a slim book that included the map plus a small volume called the Tartar Relation. In short, the Tartar Relation, written by C. de Bredia, details the mission of the Bishop Carpini to the Tartars, the European term for the Mongols. Both the Vinland Map and the Tartar Relation were written in the same handwriting and script, seemingly, and it seemed that both documents were authentic, as the men guessed that the parchment of both documents were made at the same parchment mill in Basel, Switzerland, in the 1440s. Witten bought the manuscript from Ferrajoli in 1957, but not before it had been given by another prospective buyer to the British Museum. Here, the researchers R.A. Skelton and George Painter looked at the map for the first time. They supported the map's authenticity, but concluded that without more time to work with the document, they couldn't completely authenticate it, and so they returned it back to Ferrajoli. Although the British Museum had some concern about the manuscript, which prevented them from buying it outright, another institution jumped at the opportunity: Yale University. Yale acquired the volume from one of their alumni after the alumni had bought it off of Witten and being convinced of its authenticity by Witten. They then quickly discovered that another manuscript, also bought from Ferrajoli, the Speculum Historiale, written by a Vincent of Beauvais, was the parent manuscript to both the Vinland Map and the Tartar Relation. Originally, all three documents had been bound together, with the Vinland Map and Tartar Relation having been separated out sometime before 1957. This was confirmed by the presence of wormholes going through all three documents, or the holes made by burrowing insect larvae, bookworms, which feed on the manuscript paper, or parchment rather. When all three documents were placed together, the wormholes matched up through the entire manuscript, front to back. Once in possession of the manuscript, Thomas Marston from Yale teamed up with Skelton and Painter from the British Museum, and they immediately began work on uncovering its secrets. From 1957 to 1965, this research team, from now on referred to as the Yale Research Team, worked in secrecy, not allowing outside assistants to come into their study, except for source consultations and editorial work. For 8 years, only these three men worked directly with the manuscript documents in writing their seminal work, the Vinland Map and Tartar Relation. The book was released the day before Columbus Day in 1965, and it was received with a flurry of immediate controversy. The Yale team proclaimed that the map, like the Tartar Relation and the rest of the speculum, was indeed authentic. In order to prove the map was authentic, the Yale team relied on a bit of speculation for several inconsistencies between the Vinland Map and other European world maps of the 1400s. Why was Greenland an island? Well, the team theorized that a Scandinavian map of the entirety of the island could have possibly been created during the Dark Ages, where warmer global temperatures could have melted enough ice off Greenland to uncover the coastline required to prove that it was an island. But why were Far Eastern islands and features unknown by Europeans at this time included in the map? Well, the Yale team theorized that the author of the map could have come across a map of the Far East brought back by Carpini's expedition as detailed in the Tartar Relation. Although if such a map did exist and was brought back, it is not included in writing in the Tartar Relation, nor is it included in the rest of the Speculum Historiale. Finally, how could Vinland be included at all, considering Europeans outside Scandinavia didn't seem to know at all about the Viking colony? Well, the Yale team concluded that an unknown Scandinavian source could have made its way to the Speculum Historiale author, Vincent of Beauvais, although, much like the Far Eastern map, this one seems to have been lost as well. Confident, however, in their find, despite further questions, Yale immediately set up a symposium to show off the map and bring together leading scholars to gather their thoughts and opinions. Held at the Smithsonian Institute, there was a lively mix of skepticism and debate, mostly pertaining to the unique features of the map. Cartography and historical scholarship was discussed for much of the conference, but in the end it was agreed that this alone was insufficient to conclude the authorship of the map itself. However successful the symposium was, this was the first major turning point in the debate. The symposium was heavily favored towards historical scholarship, but it was suggested that scientific testing be performed to settle the question on the map's authenticity. The first major scientific study to test the map was performed by Walter and Lucy McCrone. This husband and wife team looked closely at the ink of the map and found something striking. There was large amounts of a certain chemical in the ink called anatase. Anatase is an additive to inks, which had only been in production since the 1920s. Therefore, the McCrones concluded the map was most likely a fake, as the large amount of anatase present prevented the ink on the map from being anything but modern. This finding was huge news to those who tuned in to the debate, but many scholars still clung to the idea that the map was indeed real. Their resistance was vindicated when another test confirmed that the sample size used by the McCrones was extremely small, and therefore the amount of anatase was exaggerated, to the point that the anatase present on the map could have come from nearly any source containing anatase that had been at one point kept in near or around the map. In other words, the anatase wasn't an ingredient, but a contaminant. In 1974, another symposium was called for, this time hosted by the Royal Geographic Society, and one of the Yale team members, George Painter, took a strong defense of the map, calling much of the criticism of the map, quote, shown to be absurd or groundless, end quote. He called the scientific testing far from conclusive, and in a simply fantastic quote, concluded of the McCrone testing that, quote, for myself I feel as specialists in other fields might feel, if informed that evidence from ink showed that William Shakespeare was Sir Francis Bacon, or that Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks were written by Charlie Chaplin, end quote. It's difficult to pinpoint the influence of these symposiums beyond keeping the debate alive and well, but it's safe to say that they did not help bring a conclusion to the debate in any case. The next phase of the map debate came in the 1980s, with new rounds of testing being completed by Thomas A. Cahill, who had also participated in the 1974 symposium. He used another technique for testing the map ink, known as PIXI, to analyze its elemental composition. His test results seemed to affirm the conclusion that the McCrone tests, which had found large amounts of annotation in the ink, were erroneous. Therefore, it seemed, after all, that the map ink was genuine. Yale, which at this point had been mostly silent on the matter of the map for many years now, except for the appearances of its original research team, and in 1972 after the McCrone tests came to light, even admitted that the map may be fake, suddenly came back into the debate in official capacity in 1995 with a 30-year anniversary edition of the Vinland Map in Tartar relation. What had been changed in this edition? Well, the cover jacket had nice royal blue highlights instead of red-orange. Seriously, though, of the inside contents, nothing was changed or edited, except for 4 essays added into the front of the book as front matter. 3 of them served to directly defend the authenticity of the map. The last, however, was written by our good friend Lawrence Whitten. Whitten explained that Enzo Ferrajoli, Remember him? The manuscript dealer he had gotten the map from had never actually explained where he had gotten the map, and had been dodging the question for years, even when asked directly by his close friends. If that wasn't suspicious enough, Ferrajoli had been convicted, quite unfairly, in Witten's opinion, of being involved in a high-level smuggling conspiracy, which had stolen over 100 medieval manuscripts from a cathedral library in Zaragoza, Spain. Ferrajoli was released only partly into a sentence, but had died soon after. With the original seller having died along with the secret of how he had gotten the map, it seemed that all sure answers about the origin of the Vinland Map would die with him. Yale also hosted another symposium over the map, but this time, according to scholar Kirsten Seaver, only scholars who were supportive of the map's authenticity beforehand were invited in any meaningful way. Scholars who were skeptical of the map were either ignored or were given invitations so close to the date of the conference as to make their travel and preparations for the event impossible. This was except for our old friend, Walter McCrone, who had received an invitation for the symposium less than a month beforehand. This excerpt comes from Yale Alumni Magazine, who covered the symposium. Quote, McCrone, who has also tested the Shroud of Turin and is convinced that it is a forgery, stands by his position that the Vinland Map is a modern reproduction. In a dramatic gesture emphasizing just how heated the argument has become, McCrone showed up, uninvited, at a symposium held at Yale on February 10th to discuss the map. McCrone stayed silent throughout, but when the symposium ended, he handed out a copy of the report he said he would have submitted had he been asked. It was titled, The Vinland Map, Still a 20th Century Fake. Even though Yale attempted to ignore skepticism over the map, they managed only to reignite the debate for a new generation of scholars and scientists, without getting any closer to settling it. This resurgence in the debate is extremely interesting, considering that almost none of the original researchers of the 60s, 70s, and 80s were still around by this time. Nearly all of them had either retired or passed away. Of the original Yale researchers, R.A. Skelton had passed away in 1970, Thomas Marston in 1984, George Painter would pass in 2005, and all the 1995 version of the Vinland Map and Tartar relation passed the torch to this new generation of scholars and scientists, who had produced new mountains of work attempting to solve the mystery of the map. In 2002, a new scientific examination method, called Raman microprobe spectroscopy, was conducted to re-examine the ink of the map. Conducted by Catherine L. Brown and Robin J. H. Clark, the results seemed to confirm that the McCrone tests done in the 70s were correct, and that there were, in fact, large amounts of anatase in the ink of the map. During the same year, carbon testing was done on the parchment of the map. What D.J. Donahue, J.S. Olin, and G. Harbottle found was that the parchment on which the map was drawn dates back to the mid-1400s, which was the same rough estimate given to this Tartar relation in the rest of the Speculum Historiale, even by Witten and Ferrajoli all the way back in 1957. They concluded that even if the forger had known which time period he wanted the map to resemble, how could he have known that the parchment he used was from the correct time period? Later studies, however, would show that the forger had simply taken blank parchment from elsewhere in the manuscript and sewn it to the front of the manuscript and drawn the map on it. In 2004, Kirsten Seaver, a fellow of the Royal Geographic Institute, published Maps, Myths, and Men, which is a wonderful source, and I highly recommend it, which details the history of the Vinland Map debate up to the point of its printing. In 2009, a Danish team found that previous tests on the ink were most likely too small in sample size to be sufficient to prove that the entire map was either authentic or fake. Furthermore, it was possible that the annotates had come from a natural source after all. Since medieval iron gall ink requires sand as part of its processing and creation, and natural annotates can be found in small quantities in sand coming from the Binnenthal region of Switzerland, it is possible that if the mapmaker had used this sand, this could explain the presence of the annotates. Ultimately, however, what broke the case of the map wide open was neither scientific testing or historical debate. Instead, an independent researcher named John Paul Floyd produced the book Asari Saga. And inside was the smoking gun, which would go on to prove that the Vinland Map was indeed a fake. Foremostly, the Speculum Historiale is mentioned, and its contents cataloged in detail in an exhibition of medieval manuscripts from 1893, put on display at Zaragoza for the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage. According to the catalog, the Speculum Historiale included the Tartar relation within the same manuscript. The only item not mentioned in this manuscript was a map. Furthermore, there was another medieval world map from the 1400s called the Bianco World Map, which was known to have served as one of the prototypes for the Vinland Map due to their similarities. The problem was, there were some inconsistencies between sections that the Vinland Map copied off of the Bianco World Map. The Vinland Map's inconsistencies with the original Bianco map, however, were perfectly consistent with a modern reprinting of the Bianco World Map that had made mistakes during the reprinting. So the Vinland Map's inconsistencies with the Bianco World Map were perfectly consistent with the mistakes of the modern reprinting. In short, the forger had separated out the Tartar relation from the Speculum Historiale, added in the Vinland Map to the front of the now separate Tartar relation, using the modern reprinting of the Bianco World Map, and likely a couple of other atlases and a transcript of the Vinland Saga. Floyd had announced this crucial discovery in 2013, and in early 2018 published a full book on the Vinland Map, called Asari Saga. Later that same year, in light of this new evidence, a new symposium was held at the Mystic Seaport Museum, where Yale officially declared the Vinland Map to be fake. After over half a century, the case has finally been settled. The Vinland Map is a fraud. So soon after the conclusion of this debate, it's difficult to determine what the legacy of the map will be. As with most controversies, the legacy depends on the perspective of those looking back at it. From the perspective of a college student in 2020, what stands out most about the Vinland Map debate is how it reflects on the practices of historical study. First, there is a remarkable lack of collaboration between researchers at critical junctures within the debate. The original Yale research team worked with the map for 8 years in secrecy, whereas nearly all successful academic projects of this magnitude are collaborations between several researchers, making use of a broad web of outside assistance. Cracking open the nearest history book or narrative, and you'll most likely find whole lists of names in the acknowledgement sections of those books. The Vinland Map and the Tartar relation, as published by Yale, includes only a few credits to outsiders, none of which are mentioned to have worked specifically with the Vinland Map. Among the mountains of studies and articles written about the Vinland Map, there is very little communication between researchers of different fields, whether they be chemists, cartographers, paleographers, or others. This resulted in the debate being separated into many different threads that don't often intersect, creating a jumbled conglomeration of many smaller debates. There are so many great sources that really dig deep into the evidence of the map. However, only at select few moments, mostly the symposiums and conferences throughout the debate, do we actually see these researchers from widely varying backgrounds coming together to collaborate their efforts. In all probability, it would have taken a large collaborative academic project in order to tie the many threads of the debate together and provide enough clarity to settle it. It's hard to claim that the 1996 conference counts among these examples in any case, as Yale was only interested in inviting researchers that had already deemed the map real. Historians and researchers in general know that collaboration and assistance from many perspectives is often crucial to historical investigation. A lack of perspective leads to incomplete arguments, and a lack of clarity kills the chances of a successful investigation. Perhaps the most unfortunate fact about the Vinland Map is that all of the efforts in the world trying to determine the authenticity of the map were severely hampered and sabotaged from the very beginning by the fact that the origins of the map were never documented, only to be found out through independent investigation in the 2010s, several decades after the map had surfaced. As mentioned earlier, the trail of the map's origins began and ended with Ferrajoli. For his part, Lawrence Witten, in his essay written for the 1995 version of Yale's Vinland Map and Relation, documents the desperate attempts to convince Ferrajoli to give up his source on the map, only for Ferrajoli to dodge every question. The Yale research team declared the map authentic despite not knowing the source. This isn't to say that there wasn't any reason to believe the map was real. After all, the rest of the speculum historial was real. The parchment was real. Doubts about the make of the ink were far from conclusive at any point. The wormholes matched, and there were explanations for nearly every peculiarity of the Vinland Map's stranger cartography, though some explanations are surely more convincing than others. This is why it is so important to know the origins of any historical artifact before declaring it to be real. If it is impossible to verify these origins, historians must err on the side of caution, or risk of controversy, like the Vinland Map debate. The Vinland Map certainly deserves infamy in the world of history, but it also demands remembrance. Through the mistakes and shortcomings of the debate, we are shown their consequences, and reminded as researchers ourselves of the dual importance of perspective and provenance in trying to root out the many frauds that exist in our midst. Thank you all for watching. This has been Jacob Branstiter, an undergrad history major at Bowling Green State University, due to graduate this December. The video will finish out by going through the lists of sources for this project. And while that's happening, I'd like to thank the many people who have advised and helped me through every part of this project, including Dr. Herndon, Dr. Chalou, and Dr. Forsyth of the History Department, Maureen Berry of the BGSU University Libraries, to Max Darty for his help in reviewing my very rough draft of this project, to the BGSU History Society, who gave me so much encouragement, to my family, who provided for me in countless ways through my undergraduate career, supporting my goals and dreams, and listening so very patiently on so many phone calls as I drivel on and on about all the historical facts I find interesting. But especially to my father, Wade. Without all that time spent when I was little, watching war movies and Ken Burns documentaries together, I probably would have never discovered my love for history. I'd like to thank my girlfriend, Selena, for all her love and encouragement throughout this process. Finally, I'd like to thank my God and His Son, Jesus Christ, for strengthening me and giving me peace for all the stress, problems, and worries of my undergraduate career. I hope my efforts in some small way can repay all the blessings I've been given, and I'm eternally grateful for every one of them. Thank you.